Should my lawyer be my first call after a self-defense shooting? Well, it depends. So, the first thing I would say is if you're involved in a self-defense shooting, you should expect to be arrested, incarcerated, held in custody. Eventually, they'll try to subject you to interrogation. That's a different conversation. Um, but your ability to communicate with the outside world becomes limited once you've been arrested. Now, of course, we all know from the movies, right? You get your one phone call. It's not necessarily one phone call, but let's pretend it's one phone call. It's certainly a limited number of phone calls, right? You're not sitting there in a holding tank or interrogation room, free to use a phone anytime you like. So you have a limited ability to reach the outside world. And what do you need? I mean, you need a lawyer, but not just a lawyer. You want a competent lawyer. You want a good lawyer. You probably don't know right now a competent criminal defense lawyer. You're probably a law-abiding citizen who's never needed a competent criminal defense lawyer before. I mean, if you've got a Rolodex of criminal defense lawyers as a layperson, that suggests to me a long rap sheet. So what you'd like to be able to do is basically interview, several criminal defense lawyers and question them, hopefully in an informed way, as an informed consumer. Another good reason to get our book at lawselfdefense.com/free book. So you know what kind of questions to ask a prospective lawyer and what kind of answers to expect. So you're an informed consumer of criminal defense legal services. You'd like to be able to talk to a few of them and chat with them for a while and interview them and ask them questions and think about their responses. And so you're choosing the right one, because lawyers, like every other profession, folks, are on a bell curve. Most of them are okay. On the far end of the bell curve, the sad end, they're terrible. And on the happy end, they're world class, maybe top 5%, 10%, probably not 10%. And you don't want the sad sacks representing you. And I would suggest you don't want the mediocre ones representing you. You want that top echelon, because it makes a difference, folks. Whoever is your trial lawyer, he has to get his arguments right the first time in trial and get the judge to rule in his favor, because most of the judge's decisions are effectively unappealable. And if they're against you, that's it. You don't get a redo later. You don't get to re-argue the issue with the trial court, and the appellate courts are largely disinterested that you lost that question at trial. So you need to win those arguments in the courtroom before the judge, right there, first time. So you want the very best legal counsel. And that's not necessarily the first one you call, or the second, or the third, or the fourth. I mean, most of us are familiar with the George Zimmerman trial, the Zimmerman Trayvon Martin trial. Zimmerman ended up with an absolute world-class legal defense team. Mark O'Mara and Don West. Don's become a great personal friend of mine in the years since. But they weren't his first lawyers. He went through 4 or 5 or 6 legal teams before he ended up with them. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I would suggest you should be very open to that possibility. So you're unlikely to be able to do that kind of research while you're under arrest. And you may not get bail, depending on the circumstances of your case. Or you may not be able to make bail, depending on the circumstances of your case. So in that case, you'd want someone on the outside doing that research on your behalf, making those calls on your behalf, having those conversations on your behalf. That can only happen if that person on the outside is aware of the need to do that. I would want that process started as quickly as possible. So when people ask me, who should I call in the immediate aftermath of a use of force event, what I usually tell them is, call whoever you are most confident is going to answer the phone, so you can get that process started right away. Like, I wouldn't call someone who I knew was on a month-long vacation in the Amazon. When are they going to start helping me? Right? Not until they get back. And frankly, when do these self-defense scenarios tend to happen? I mean, sometimes they happen at noon, but a lot of times they happen at 11 at night, 3 in the morning, dark 30. And when I hear people saying, well, I'll call my lawyer first, I'm often thinking, well, if it's 2 in the morning, what makes you think your lawyer? First of all, do you have a lawyer? Do you have a criminal defense lawyer on call? You've got one on retainer? That's unlikely if you're a normal law-abiding citizen. So you don't even have a lawyer to call anyway. But let's imagine that you did. Let's imagine you had my personal number and you called me. Folks, my phone's not going to ring at 2 a.m. from a strange call. Not from a strange call. Now, if you're a Law Self-Defense Platinum member, you get a hotline number. That reaches me. But unless you're a Law Self-Defense Platinum member, you don't have that hotline number. And if something happens at 2 a.m., I'm not going to get your call. Certainly not immediately. So if you have, family members, you have a spouse, or you have adult children, or you have, adult siblings, or who your relationship with them is such that you have a reasonable expectation they'll pick up the phone, whatever hour of day or night it is, I'd probably call them and then have them get the process started on your behalf, reaching out to your lawyer, all that kind of stuff, finding you a lawyer. And because they can make an infinite number of calls on your behalf once they're alerted to the need to do that. Now, if you do call your lawyer first, can that be used against you in court? Well, yeah, anything can be used against you in court. If by that we mean, can it be talked about in front of the jury to try to make me look bad? You have to presume that the prosecution is free to talk about anything in front of the jury in an effort to make you look bad. First thing he did, ladies and gentlemen, was call his lawyer. Didn't call the police, didn't call an ambulance to save this poor kid. Sure. Same, by the way, if you have a self-defense insurance company, like there was the David Kohley case, the USCCA member. He was the I don't want to use a brand name, the internet food delivery guy who was involved in a confrontation with an internet prankster in a food court in a mall and shot the prankster. And he immediately called his quote unquote self-defense insurance company, USCCA, who, by the way, although they now claim otherwise, appear to have completely failed to have defended their member, David Kohley. He ended up with a public defender, had a mixed verdict at trial. Of course, I've talked about that before. More information at that, if you're interested, at lawselfdefense.com/USCCA. One of the many reasons I do not recommend USCCA, by the way. Not a fan. I think they're a bad bet, personally. But one of the things the prosecutor did was talk in court about the fact that, hey, David Kohley, first call he made was to his self-defense insurance company, USCCA, in an effort to make him look bad in front of the jury. So they can talk about it. That doesn't mean don't make the call. So, for example, I'm personally a member of a competitor to USCCA, often a sponsor of our content, CCW Safe. CCW Safe, I mentioned Don West earlier. Don West was one of George Zimmerman's defense counsel, brilliant criminal defense attorney. He's now, and has for many years now, been national trial counsel for CCW Safe. And any legal team that has Don West participating in the defense is head and shoulders above any legal team that doesn't. So that alone is a good reason to be a member of CCW Safe, among many others. And of course, CCW Safe, if you're involved in an event, they encourage you to call them so they can get the wheels rolling. By the way, a big advantage of that is they answer the phone 24 hours a day. If you had a lawyer, your lawyer's probably not answering the phone at 2 a.m. Your spouse or your adult kids or your adult siblings, they might not answer the phone at 2 a.m. The phone may be turned off at 2 a.m. But CCW Safe will answer the phone whatever hour you call because they have staff for that purpose. And once that staff is alerted, then they have an actual response team, including Don West, including experienced homicide detectives, retired, but experienced homicide detectives who are activated on your behalf to begin working as your detectives. Normally, the only detectives operating on a scene work for the prosecutor. It'd be pretty nice to have your own detectives working for you on the scene as well, especially experienced cops who tend to get the respect of the other cops on the scene.